Okay, so today we're going to work on silhouetting the elephant just uh, as our first step to creating a composite image. Just for your own reference, I am going to be using my Wacom tablet, my drawing tablet. So if I'm seeming very precise using the lasso tool, that's probably why. The lasso tool, um, in its raw state, not the polygon lasso tool or the magnetic lasso tool, which we'll look at both of those. Those tend to be a little bit easier to use with the mouse. The lasso tool, again in its raw form, really only works with the Wacom tablet or some other type of drawing tablet. I'm going to come down to my toolbar and I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to click on the zoom tool and go ahead and zoom in kind of close so we can get a better idea of what we're working with here. So we'll look at a few different ways to silhouette. I'm going to start out using the lasso tool just so you can see that particular tool in its raw state. Now again, I'm using a Wacom tablet, so it's going to look pretty good. When you are working on a selection, it's really critical to get as precise as you possibly can. One thing to note with using Photoshop is you can use the Command minus to zoom out and Command plus to zoom in. And then also your space bar turns into the hand tool without dropping your selection. So that's very useful to note. So I'm just going to go along here, and as you can see, I'm working on my lasso tool right now, and I'm just going to be moving along the edge, of my lasso tool. Now, one of the benefits of getting the hand is you kind of release, and then you can also get back into a good spot. Now, since I released using when I had my hand tool here, I released the mouse. I also released the selection. But now, as you notice, if you come up to the control panel, and this is new, you can either be working in a state of selection where you're just making one selection. So if I started to draw again, if I started to draw again, it would drop that selection and then create the new selection. So if I go ahead and edit, undo that, or hit Control Z, I can then go back to my original selection and click on this little guy right here, which actually puts you in an additive mode. You see the little plus sign next to the lasso tool. So now I can go through and start adding to my selection, and I'm just going to roughly come back to the beginning because I didn't get quite what I wanted to in a few places. Back to the beginning. So then it always is in an additive mode, so if I wanted to add this, I can do so. I can also work in a minus mode, so if I didn't want something like this little nib right here that's sticking over, I can click on that. So using the hand tool to move over. And that is going to work. A lot of this is like the Pathfinder functions that we learned about in Illustrator. So this is minus, and this is almost like the trim or minus front in Illustrator, where it's only going to select the areas that overlap with your new selection and your old selection. I'm going to go back to this additive mode because that's really what we're going to be working on right now. So I'm going to keep going through and adding to my selection. Now, this seems like a very slow process, and it is. Some of the best art directors, creative directors, and graphic designers that you'll meet will let you know that this is just, part of the process. It takes, to make a good selection is critical, and is a critical thing to learn how to do, whether you're using the pen tool or the lasso tool. There are a few things if we want to look at the polygon lasso tool. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the polygon lasso tool. And this works very similarly. Now notice when I switched, just to note, when I switched from the lasso tool to the polygon lasso tool, it immediately defaulted to this creating a new selection rather than adding. So if I click here and I make a new selection, I just lost my old one. So Control Z. I'm going to go into an additive mode, and now that we're clicking and moving down, it just lets me go point to point. Oops. And it's gotten more sensitive, and I've noticed this with the new version. As I'm clicking, if you double click it all, and it's even more sensitive with the tablet, it will drop the selection and it'll just make a straight line to wherever you started. And this can be problematic. So let's say that I started here and I'm coming along. I wouldn't make the selection, and I accidentally double clicked. It's going to make a straight line from that point to this point, and it may not do exactly what you want. So be very careful if you're using the polygon lasso tool, especially if you're using it with a tablet. Now the other lasso tool, the last one, is the magnetic lasso tool, and this particular tool, again, it defaulted. Look at the control panel up here on the top left. It defaulted back to a new selection, so we need to click on that additive mode since we want to add to it. You also can just hold the shift key down. We'll talk about that in a minute, to go into an additive mode, and that's the older way of doing things. But you can see it does a pretty good job. It's kind of finding the edge for you, but I got a little wobbly there, and it found a different line. So I'm going to have to try to get it to find this line down here. It's just, again, it's a little fussy. It doesn't really do what I want it to do, so just gonna switch it. Sometimes when you have something that's silhouetted on a white background, it works pretty well, but in most cases it's kind of a mess. Now, the next selection tool that we have is the quick selection tool. It is kind of a more advanced or a newer version of the magic wand tool. And this it's kind of actually a combination of the magic wand and the magic lasso tool. It kind of combines both of those tools. So I'm going to back out so you can see. Now the quick selection tool is based on your brush size. Now notice its default is to be in the additive mode. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to use my bracket keys to increase the size of my brush because it's based on the brush size. You can also come up here and change the brush size manually if you don't want to use the bracket keys. Remember, the left bracket decreases the size of your brush, and the right bracket increases the size. So now it's always in an additive mode, so I can just kind of run along the elephant and grab all this stuff quickly. Now you can see here, this is a problem. I obviously didn't want the green. So I can hit the minus tool. I can put it in a subtractive mode by hitting the Option or Alt key on the Mac. So the Alt key on the PC puts it in a subtractive mode. And I can just come down here. Now notice I have this small green area, and obviously my brush is too big, so I'm going to use the bracket key, left bracket key, to decrease the size, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key to put it in a subtractive mode, and I'm just going to kind of run up in here. Now I might even go a little bit smaller to get up in between the legs, that tiny crevice, and then increase the size again. Now again, you can go back and manually change the size if you so wish, if you're more comfortable, but really it's one of those keyboard commands that I would definitely suggest learning how to use and putting it in your memory bank, because you will use it all the time. And you can notice up here on the control panel, you do not have to use the Alt key to put it into a subtractive mode. You can, in fact, come up to the control panel where it has the little quick selection tool with the minus next to it. That does put it into a subtractive mode, but it stays in the subtractive mode, and usually you're going to be hopping back and forth very quickly. So learning those the quick key commands is really quite critical. Again, I'm holding down the Alt key here to get closer. Use the hand tool to the space bar as a hand tool to move around. Just as a reminder, that's what I'm doing. I'm hitting the space bar. Also, my Wacom tablet does have, and if you have some sort of drawing tablet, you probably have a little icon on that tablet to put it into a the hand tool so you can move around, you can navigate around. So there we go. Looking pretty good at this point. Got to go in. Now this is going to be a tough area to select, even with, you know, the quick selection tool. And this area in here is very chunky. So that might be something that we would want to go in manually. I would say most of your selections you could do with the quick selection tool, but going back and really cleaning up the edge, make sure that it's nice and clean, you probably want to do that manually with the lasso tool. So now going around, things are looking pretty good. I am going to go in here, I'm going to zoom in to this particular section, and you can see how kind of I've got, because it's almost the same tonality of the shadowing of the grass and the trunk of the elephant, I'm going to have to go in with the lasso tool. We'll use the polygon lasso tool because unless you have a tablet, that's not going to work all that well. So, oops, I'm going back. Delete that point. I am going to click on the subtractive mode, or you can also hold the Shift key down. Since I'm going to be doing a lot of subtracting, I don't necessarily need to, I'm not going to be going back and forth as much, so keeping it in the subtractive mode using the control panel is just fine. So kind of go through. Now, I'm on the fence with the quick selection tool, to be quite honest, whether it saves you time or not, because oftentimes I find that once you get in this close, you find, and you should be getting in this close or closer, you'll find that you have little areas that are not correctly selected, and you have to make these tiny adjustments, so it's a good selection. So it's whatever your personal flow is. I've done this so much that I feel like when I use any of the quick selection tools that it just ends up being, oops, I'm still in the subtractive. I'm going to go back to the additive mode momentarily. Actually, I am going to, because I am going to be going back and forth quite a bit, I am going to go into the regular mode. This will allow me to shift click to add, and I just have to hold the shift down for the first point and then I can let go. Or if I want to go into the subtractive mode, I can click on the Alt or Option key for the first point and then it goes into the subtractive mode. That's a good flow if you're comfortable using the keyboard commands. So again, going in, holding down the Alt key for the first point to take out this little area. And this is typically how I personally work. I, again, don't use the quick selection tool very often. It's usually either the pen tool making a good initial selection or the lasso tool or polygon lasso tool, depending on whether I have access to my tablet or not. So for demo purposes, I think that we are just going to be done. I would probably spend another 20 minutes or so going around with a fine-tooth comb, making sure that all little areas like this are cleaned up and perfectly selected. Oops. I clicked one too many times and dropped the selection. So there you go. We are going to do another video on the refined mask tool, and I might clean this up just a little bit more for you all before we head over to that. But this is the end of this selection tool video, and there'll be a second and third video that are associated with this project. Thanks.